Hello, this is another effort on my part to broaden everyone's knowledge about Korea, and I have decided that the best way to do that, at least utilizing the internet, is to read it, record it, and have everyone listen to it so that they can just sit back, relax, and just listen. I know my voice can be a bit monotonous at times, but hear me out because this is probably something that you're not going to get anywhere else. And I will be reading books from my extensive selection that you sometimes see behind me when you are in video conference with me. And today I will begin my reading sessions with a book called The Brief Encounters, and it has a subtitle called Early Reports of Korea by Westerners. This is a book that was written last year, or this year, by Brother Anthony of Taize and Mr. Robert Neff. And it is a collection of very early records of Westerners who have come into contact or have heard about Korea and included them in their writings. It is a valuable work of history, and I really hope that it helps with everyone in understanding Korea better. So without further ado, today I will be reading pages 16 and 17 of this book, the editor's preface. So this is Brief Encounters, Early Reports of Korea by Westerners, and the date is October 27th, 2020. And I will be starting my reading after a brief intermission. Editor's Preface. The Korean peninsula remained virtually unknown to the West for much longer and more completely than either China or Japan, although for a long time both of these countries were virtually closed to foreign exploration. The Portuguese and the Dutch had dealings with Japan and China, and the Jesuit mission to China had privileged access to Beijing and a few other areas. But with the exception of shipwrecked sailors, Korea remained completely unvisited. Early texts describing Korea depended either on Chinese sources evoking its history, or on the book written by Hendrik Hamel after his years of captivity there in the 17th century. In the West, the late 18th and early 19th centuries were a period of industrial expansion and of exploration, when intrepid individuals set out from Europe to survey the coasts of the still largely unknown lands around the Pacific Ocean in preparation for large-scale trade. Even then, very few paid much attention to Korea, since there seemed to be no prospect of worthwhile trade, and it was known to be very hostile to outside visitors. We have therefore found it interesting to bring together an anthology of the few texts written and published in those years, in which the first direct contacts between Westerners and Koreans are recorded. Those contacts were few in number and did not go very far because of difficulties in communication. Usually it was simply a matter of a short attempt to establish contact with the inhabitants of a few offshore islands, including the minor officials serving as magistrates there. Until 1866, nobody from a Western country had any clear idea of the exact location of Seoul or how it could be reached. The seas surrounding the multiple islands of the west coast remained uncharted for the most part, useless. Oh, sorry about that. I skipped the whole line. The seas surrounding the multiple islands of the west coast remained uncharted for the most part, and the primitive maps followed by the earlier navigators proved to be quite useless. The General Description of Seoul by John Carey Hall, published in 1883 after his visit in 1882, constitutes the first detailed eyewitness portrayal of the hitherto unknown city published in Europe, and it is still very slight. Yet within a few years there were American, British, French, German, Russian, Italian, and Belgian legations in Seoul. Protestant and Catholic missionaries were moving around Korea freely, and schools and church buildings were springing up, while merchants and adventurers had started to explore and exploit the country's resources. From that moment on, many books and articles about Korea were published, texts that are familiar to many. In this anthology, we have brought together a selection of texts from the earlier decades, prior to the opening of the country, including extracts from Charles Dallei's Histoire de l'Église de Corée, or The History of the Catholic Church in Korea, and other French-language texts that have been translated by Brother Anthony. They are often entertaining human documents, evoking the perplexities of both Koreans and foreign visitors when faced with each other. Nowadays, travel literature is a recognized category of historical document, since these texts allow us to trace the development of both knowledge and stereotypes with indications of the prejudices brought by Western travelers of an early age. In today's post-colonial era, academic studies often focus on such topics. I will read again. In today's post-colonial era, academic studies often focus on such topics and require access to contemporary documents. For the general reader, old tales have a lasting charm, and it is fascinating to read about travel in an age without radar or maps, steam engines or planes, dictionaries or guidebooks. A particularly well-documented study of the 19th century approaches to Korea, focusing mainly on French initiatives, was published in French in 2012. Pierre-Emmanuel Roux, La Croix, La Baleine et le Canon. Paris, Éditions du Cerf. Sorry for butchering the French. This is referenced in the text by the name of the author. And that concludes the editor's preface of Brief Encounters. Thank you.